Hello everyone. In our session today, we are taking a look at configuring Network Policy Server, referred to as NPS. In our previous session, we noted that Network Policy Server allows you to create and enforce organization-wide policies for client health, for connection request authentication, and for connection request authorization. We are now going to look at configuring the NPS server to perform those tasks. NPS server can be configured as a radius server for dial-up or VPN connection. And when we configure the NPS server as a radius server for dial-up or VPN connections, what we're doing is we are creating network policies that allow NPS to authenticate and authorize connections from these dial-up or VPN network access servers, also known as radius clients. The next scenario that we can configure using the NPS is radius server for 802.1x wireless or wired connections. And when we use this configuration, we are also creating network policies that would allow NPS to authenticate and authorize connections from the wireless access points and any authenticating switches. And these are also called radius clients. In our third scenario for configuring the network policy server, we can configure the network policy server as a network access protection server. And when we configure NPS as a network access protection health policy server, we are going to be creating health policies that allow the NPS server to validate the configuration of network access protection capable client computers before they connect to the network. If you have client computers that are not compliant with the health policies that are set out on the NPS server, then those client computers can be placed on a restricted network and automatically updated to bring them into compliance. We want to start out by looking at the configuration for the remote server for dial-up or VPN connection. We are now going to access the Network Policy Server by clicking on Tools, Network Policy Server. In the left-hand pane, we can see all the nodes for the NPS server. We have our radius clients or policies, network access protection, accounting, and template management. The first configuration we're going to do is that radius server for dialing and VPN. But before we look at the first configuration, I want us to take a look at template management. So let us expand template management. And these are all templates: shared secrets, radius clients, remote radius servers, IP filters, help policies, remediation, and server groups. And these are templates that you can create before you begin configuring, so that in your configuration, you'll be able to use these templates. Let's look at the first template here, shared secret. And we are going to right click on shared secrets and say new. And here you can give the template name, and let us call this template name secret. So we call secret, and that's the shared secret would be your password. So we're actually creating the template beforehand so that we wouldn't have to do this configuration when we are doing the VPN and dial-up configuration. Now we put in our shared secret here, or you can generate one. For our lab, we're going to put a shared secret, and we're going to call that secret password 02. So we go Shift and P, ASS, WORD, 02. We click in the box below and we type the same thing. ORD 02, and we click on OK. And we can also configure a template for the Radius client and for any of these others so that we could use them in the configuration. So just know that that's what the templates are for you to create beforehand some of the configuration that you will need. We're now going to look at the remote dial-in and VPN configuration. And on the standard configuration here, you see that we can select configuration scenarios, local tab. And we're going to click the down arrow because we said we wanted to choose Radius server for dial-up or VPN connections. Notice that we are here on the NPS local tab, and we want to select a configuration from the standard configuration here. So we're going to click on the down arrow, and we're going to select Radius server for dial-up or VPN connection. What we need to do now is to click on the link Configure VPN or Dial-Up to begin the configuration. So we click on the link. And we have a choice here. Either you configure your dial-up or your VPN, and both of them will perform authentication and authorization for any connection requests coming in by the client, whether it be a VPN client or a dial-up client. We're going to choose a VPN connection. So this one we're creating for clients coming in as VPN clients. And by default, you will have the name Virtual Private Network VPN Connections, but you can change that name if you wish. For our lab exercise, we're going to leave the default name, and we're going to go ahead and click Next. Now, if you have your server already set up as a Radius client, like a VPN server, then you will see it here in this box on the Radius client. If not, you're going to add a Radius client. So you want to click on Add. And remember, under our template section, we had the option of creating a template. If we had created a Radius template, we would have been able here to click on Select an existing template, choose the template name. But we didn't create a template, so we actually now have to configure this template. So we're going to put the friendly name for the template, and we're going to call it VPN Connection. And we want the address of the server. That's going to be the VPN server. And let us choose server2.contoso.com. Now here, we can either select the template for the shared secret, or we can actually type in the shared secret. So you usually have a choice on these configuration pages, either to select something that you have already configured as a template, or just type in the information as you go. We did do a template for the shared secret, so we're going to click the down arrow and we're going to choose that template that we had called secret, so that our template information automatically comes in. We want to click on OK to continue. And there we have the Radius client name. So we want to select this one and we want to click on next. And before we click on next, I want you to note that and remember what we said previously, that this Radius client is not a client computer. It is an access server referred to as Radius client. So we're going to click next to continue. And now we have the opportunity to select the authentication method. Now by default, we have the MS Chat version 2. If you choose this method, then the users are going to have to specify a password for authentication. You can also choose the second method, which is MS Chat, but you only want to choose this one if your network runs operating systems that do not support MS Chat. Probably older operating systems. You also have the choice of extensible authentication protocol. If you choose this one, you're going to need to have some sort of certificate service in place. Let's just take a look at it. Let's click on extensible authentication. And you can see here that you can use a smart card or other certificate. You can use Microsoft Protected EAP. And you can also use Secure Password EAP. But if you choose this one, remember you're going to need a certificate when you are doing your configuration. Let's remove the stick. For our class exercise, we just want to do the MS Chat version 2 for our authentication. Let's click next. And at this point, we need to add the user groups who will get this policy. Now, you might have already created a group within Active Directory and placed client computers within the group. The users who are members of the group will either be allowed or denied access based on the network policy that you're creating. If you don't create a group, then by default, the policy applies to all users. So we're going to leave all users for our lab and click next. We also have an option here of specifying IP filters. And remember, this was also a template. So we could have done this template before, pre-configured it. And if we did, we would have simply clicked on the down arrow and select the template name. Okay, you have input filters and output filters both for IP4 and IP6. Just let's look at the configuration. If we're looking at input filters, what we're looking at is controlling the packets that the interface sends out. Okay, and you would click input filters and you would click on new, and you will put the IP address, subnet mask, and protocol to configure your filter. Cancel here, cancel again. And the same thing we will do for the output filters. Remember, the output filters would be the packets that this interface receives. So you can configure your filters here, or you can do the template, and when you come to this page, just select the template. For all our purposes, we're just going to go ahead and click on next. If we're not configuring a filter, it means that we want the package to be sent and received by everyone. Click next. And here you get to type the ISP address. And please note, before authentication, you will need to remove the ISP name from the username. Okay, we want to click next to continue. And we have our configuration for the VPN. You can look at your configuration. If you want to view the details in your default browser, you can click configuration details. If you want to go back and change the configuration, you can click on previous. We want to save our configuration, so we're going to click on finish. So remember, the server was server 2, and this was the connection request policy, and we did it on virtual private network connections. So we want to click on finish. So we have our first configuration for the VPN MPS server. Let's take a look at configuring the radius server 802.1x wireless or wired connections. So we select it from the drop-down list, and then we want to click on configure 802.1x. It's configured much the same way with a few changes. And here we have, again, to choose the connection types. So you can either do a secure wireless or a secured wire. Whichever one you do, NPS will be responsible for authentication and authorization for these clients. We're going to choose wired. And again, we have the default name. We could leave it or we could change it to a custom default name. Let's click on next. And we need to add a radius client. And you're told again, we're reminded, radius clients are network access servers. An example being an authenticating switch. Radius clients are not what? Client computers. You can add a new radius client here, or you could choose the one that you have. And if we added a radius client, we will be going through the same configuration that we did before. Or we could have done it on a template and we would just choose the template. Let's add again. For this friendly name, we're just going to type wired. And we want to add the server address. or the IP, and we're going to say server1.contoso.com as the DNS name. We're going to use the same secret so that we wouldn't have to type that in, and click on OK. So we're going to choose the wired and click on next. And look at the authentication for wired. The screen looks a bit different from the one we selected for the VPN. That's until you have to use some sort of certificate for this one, because you can see it says that you need EAP for this type of policy. Okay, and you have your choice here: the smart card, protected EAP, or EAP MS Chat version 2. And let's click on configure here. And I just want to demonstrate to you that if you use the smart card or any of these here, you have to have a certificate, because it tells you here a certificate could not be found that can be used with extensible authentication protocol. So remember that for your exam. If you're going to use the authentication method, but any of these EAP type policies, you're going to need a certificate. Okay, let's click on next to continue. Again, you get to select the group, and users that are members of the group that you select will be allowed or denied access based on the network policy permission settings that you have. And again, we're going to let it apply to all users, so we want to click on next. And we have here the option of configuring traffic controls. So if your switch or your wireless access point supports assignment of traffic controls using radius tunnel attribute, you can configure these attributes. If you do not use traffic controls, or you want to configure them later, then just click on next. So we're going to come back to our traffic to look at the different traffic controls later. Want to click on next to continue. And here we are. We have the radius client, we have the connection request policy, and we have the secure wired Ethernet connection, and we click on finish. So that we have two configurations for the NPS, one VPN and the other wired or wireless. And we're not going to look at network access protection in this session. We look at network access protection configuration in another session. Let us take a look at some of the policies that we set up. Let's click on connection request policies. We did the secured wired connections, and we did the virtual private network connections. Look at the network policies, and we see we have secured wired Ethernet connections enabled and virtual private network VPN connections enabled. Let us take a look at accounting. Remember, in our previous video, we talked about the SQL Server database, where you need to lodge any information about connections that are coming into the NPS server. So let's look at accounting. Let's click on accounting here. And we have a wizard. We can configure accounting. Also, there are three types of login, three ways that you can log information for accounting for the network policy server. You have different types of logs. You have an event login, and this is used primarily for auditing and troubleshooting connection attempts. And you can configure that by going to the properties in the NPS console. Here we have SQL login also, where you can configure how you want the data to be logged. We want to click on Configure Accounting. And this carries you through the wizard for configuring accounting. So you want to click Next. And here you have the default is that the data will be logged to the SQL server. But you can also choose log that data to a text file on the local computer, right? You can simultaneously log to the SQL server and to the local text file. Or you can log to an SQL Server database using text file login for failover purposes. We're going to leave that log to an SQL Server database and click Next. And at this point, you can configure your SQL login. And what you're going to be doing is setting up the data link between the NPS and the SQL Server. And if you have your database, you will select that database. And depending on your choice, NPS will either modify the existing database or create a new one for you. To configure the login, you simply click Login Configured here. And it will allow you to enter the name of the SQL server. Enter the information that you want to log. Like if you want to log information for a specific username and password, you can enter that here. You can select the database on the server, or you could attach a new database. Click on Cancel. By default, this is the information that's logged. If a client makes a request to access the network, a client requests authentication, then you have periodic accounting status. Remember that everything that the client does is being recorded and logged, both accounting and authentication. You have the option here, and this is turned on by default. If login fails, discard the connection request. So if the data is not being logged, the connection request will simply just drop out. Cancel this box. So that's what is involved with accounting. You can change the log properties here by clicking on Change Log Properties. You can deselect settings that you don't want. You click here on the Log File tab. It goes to the login here. If there's a log file, goes to in the Windows system 32 log files by default, but you could browse and change, and you could configure how this log file is created, whether monthly, weekly, daily, what happens here when log reaches to a particular size. When this is full, delete all the log files. This is default. So you can come in here and you could make configuration for your accounting. In our session, We looked at configuring the radius server as a VPN server. We looked at configuring the radius server as a wired 802. We looked at configuring the server as an 802.1x wired connection. We also saw that we had the option of configuring templates so that we could use when we were configuring the NPS servers. We also took a look at accounting and the configuration of accounting. This is the end of our session, and I want to thank you for listening.